my thorough critique of the alt-right. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and over the past year or so, I have avoided criticizing the alt-right, not because I couldn't or didn't want to, but mainly because of the fact that there was this thing that happened last year called blood sports, where one of the features was that hordes of sock puppet accounts viciously attacked just about every centrist YouTuber, trying to ruin our channel's reputations, and sometimes doxing people and sending photoshopped images of them to their parents and crap like that. I didn't feel like having anything like that happen to me, obviously, especially because they came after me anyway for reasons essentially nobody could actually figure out, though I'm fairly positive I know exactly why, but I won't get into it. So, instead, I carefully thought out my full objection to their governmental ideas so I could eventually present them when there was a good reason, such as the Christchurch tragedy. Oddly, I don't think that the Bloodsports / alt-right sock puppet army really attacked leftists much. I mean, I never saw or heard them say anything about ContraPoints, who would theoretically be their biggest opponent online, as Contra takes a completely hardline stance about anybody that might be even vaguely considered alt-right, or might even look that way to Contra's clueless audience, by calling them full-blown fascists, which I'm not positive is actually true in the case of, say, race realists especially, and of course, Contra wastes little time in similarly attacking centrists. Coincidence, I'm sure.
And of course, another advantage of using innocuous symbols is that when leftists try to point those symbols out, the fascists can always say,
"These gullible SJWs now think that even the OK sign is racist. Is there anything they don't think is racist?"
And the gullible centrists will be taken right in. The poor centrists. They're so afraid that Antifa is going to punch them because of their hair or their emoji. And you know, some leftists are assholes or idiots.
Regardless, the main criticism of the alt-right that I did once present was a while back, I believe well over 2 years ago, which was most well articulated in my video We Was Vikings, which got over 5,000 views and a fairly good approval rating, especially considering how obsessively the alt-right types come to downvote any good criticisms of their worldview and general behavior. However, one of the things I realized after making that video was that although there are a number of potential ways to criticize the concept of race realism, some of which I brought up, I don't think attempting to debunk race realism is really the most strategic way of debating the alt-right, due mainly to the fact that the science around such things is very complicated, and you'd need to come prepared with a lot of data and science knowledge, which some people who've tried simply didn't have. Which then opened them up to being mocked by people like this guy, which is just sad.
The male does not remain with the female. The pregnancy is very short. With the female...
Brown trouts do not get pregnant. Did you just say the pregnancy is very short?
But even more so, even if you are an expert around IQ tests and genetic science, which I doubt most people are who might try to make a good video opposing race realism, even if you could properly debunk the concept, I don't really think you'd have much luck in getting through to the people that you'd want to be changing the minds of in regards to the issue. Not only would they probably not watch and seriously consider your video if you did manage to make a great scientific debunk, even if it was entertaining, assuming such a thing would even be possible at all, which honestly, maybe it wouldn't be. But more so, I honestly think that a lot of the followers of the alt-right would never be convinced by logic and reason, because I think that even if the science of race realism is sound, what probably motivates them more is their emotional tribalism that makes them think that black people are stupid and violent, most likely due to their experiences around black people. Are these people correct in thinking that because the black people in their neighborhood growing up certainly acted fairly foolishly and engaged in a lot of violent crime, that this must be because black people are genetically inferior? Well, this is not really my belief, but I have always conceded that unfortunately, I don't really know one way or the other. But again, more importantly, there's just some things that you can never convince people of, no matter how hard you try. So maybe it's best just to not try. Thus, while I know that some freakishly simple-minded people will undoubtedly get mad at me for doing this, I think the best way to argue with the alt-right is to simply take them on their terms and play devil's advocate by running with their beliefs and choosing to find other ways of arguing with the concept of a white ethno-state that aren't simply that every skin color is equally as intelligent. Now, does it make me feel good to rhetorically concede that black people might legitimately be less intelligent than white and Asian people on average? No, of course not. But I assure you, my arguments against the alt-right will be a lot more effective after doing so, which is why I figure it's probably worthwhile to try. That all being said, after several months of the blood sports thing making me afraid to ever talk about the alt-right in public, I had time to boil my argument down to one question that could potentially stop any white nationalist true believer in their tracks, at least long enough to get them to pause and have to really think hard about how best to serve their own interests. That would be something along the lines of this. Knowing that white nationalist types seemingly want to preserve a future for their white children by fighting against what they fear to be a potential white genocide, which I believe is mostly supposed to be coming from foreign nations, but don't quote me. Well, if that's what they believe, the question would be as follows. If numerous foreign nations declared a full-scale war on the United States, like it does sometimes seem like Islamic nations are just about ready to engage in, do you or do you not want black American soldiers fighting for the future of your white children? For me, it's hard to imagine them somehow finding a way to say, no, because clearly if it was a full-scale war, we'd want every soldier that we could get. Even on their own terms of believing that black people are intellectually inferior, it probably wouldn't matter whether or not these soldiers were the absolute most intelligent people you could find, because in all actuality, don't most super intelligent people in the military end up as officers anyway? And doesn't the military always need what they call grunts? You see, by taking them on their own terms, you'll be forcing them to think about whether or not they'd want to allow black people to essentially do their fighting for them, which seems to me like it would appeal to even their most racist instincts of being okay with black people as long as they'll act like this.
I'm coming! Okay, Snowflake?
Oh, yes, my big chocolate warrior.
However, there's a possibility that I'm wrong, in that perhaps some of these people are so afraid of a potential white genocide, which, for the record, isn't a 100% baseless fear, as there have been numerous people that have been advocating for it fairly openly on social media to a lot of approval, including in my own personal social sphere, where I encountered one guy who was literally talking about things like how Russia and China might team up with every African and Middle Eastern nation to kill every white American, but not every racial minority in our nation for some unfathomable reason. As opposed to what would obviously really happen if Russia and China invaded the US, which would be to kill anybody who got in their way. Regardless, I think the simple militaristic angle is the best way of attacking their arguments. Clearly, if our nation or every Western nation was militaristically crippled by trying to ethnically purify a portion of each nation, or by shipping every white person off to their own country or whatever, it wouldn't be too hard for one of the major geopolitical forces to end up overtaking us as the global superpower, and I think everybody should be able to figure that out. The only thing I'm thinking might be an argument still against this would be to try to say that any future war would surely be fought with drone pilots and remote control robots, which would mean that only the smartest people would be allowed to be in the military, or something. However, presuming that we could upgrade our military to entirely remote-controlled droids within the next few years, which is a lot to presume, I still don't think that the argument holds water, because even if robots and drones could do literally everything a person can, which is doubtful, there's plenty of black people I've played video games with who are at least pretty good at video games, right? Not to mention Asians. I mean, let's be realistic. Piloting a drone or droid is basically exactly the same as a video game, and plenty of white people I've played with or against are far worse than plenty of black people, so expelling them as future soldiers based on the notion that they are of this different skin color besides white is just silly. And even still, there will be plenty of jobs for people at the base, in terms of driving forklifts and janitorial type work, if all of the more high-skilled jobs were hypothetically taken and there was no more need for grunts or whatever. Now, I can think of one last argument that could be used against this hypothetical upcoming global conflict, which would be the idea that after the advent of nuclear weapons, another major world war might not ever really happen, as the nukes would keep people from engaging with people who could blow up their entire country, and thus the geopolitical forces such as China, Russia, and the United States will only end up in trade wars with each other. This line of thinking is fairly reasonable to consider, but once again, won't we always need more workers to power the economy? I mean, sure, even if automation takes away a whole lot of jobs, couldn't we find other ways of striving for more productivity by utilizing all potential labor, skilled or unskilled, so that our economy ends up the strongest? I'm simply failing to see why every able-bodied individual wouldn't be worthwhile for something in the case of any type of serious challenge from a foreign nation. Which is why perhaps we should legitimately stop with all of the identity politics nonsense and think more logically about what we have in common and how to best utilize every citizen to ensure that our nation is as great as possible. Unless, of course, you want our democracy to fall, which a lot of people do. That's all I have to say for this video. If you have a compelling counter-argument, please do leave it in the comments, because I'm actually curious at this point. And if you found it helpful, please consider donating to me on PayPal so that I can get that second episode of my animated series, The Culture War is Lit, made by hopefully the end of the summer or so. And then like and subscribe, and follow me on minds.com. Thanks a bunch.